Welcome everyone. How's everybody doing today?
Doing great.
Oh, good.
Thank you. That's great.
I am very excited to be speaking with you, and I'm also very excited to be able to peel the layers with you on this topic of sales to corporations. And I'm hoping that we will be able to give a lot of value to our listeners, to our audience. So before we get started, I just wanted to, thank Armenia Startup Academy Traction Program. The program is implemented by Catalyst Foundation and supported by the European Union's EU for Business Technology Development for Armenia. That's implemented by GIST and of course Viva-MTS, and we have Eduard here that has joined the initiative as a corporate partner and supporter. So thanks to everyone involved. And thanks to you all for making the time from different time zones to be here. And I'd like to make this panel as structured as we can. And with that, what I'll do is just like any sales pitch meeting that usually starts off, to go through an icebreaker and a rapid fire, each one of us to just tell a couple of words about us. And one fun fact about you, so our audience can remember you by that as well. So I'll start off. I'm Zareh Zurabyan. Everybody calls me Z because when I moved to US, nobody could pronounce my name, so I just go by Z. I am in the biotech industry. I work for Eppendorf, which is a biotech company, and I'm in the Bio-ITech division. Which specializes in software for research management. And one fun fact about me, I do Muay Thai kickboxing. So if you guys could go around the circle and do the same, please.
Sure, I'll go next. Hi everyone, I'm Varag, Gharibjanian. So I'm at this company called Claire. We do computer vision software. Mainly to do hand tracking and gesture recognition. I work a lot in the AR and VR device space. From Orange County, California originally, currently in LA. I guess fun fact is I'm really good at ping pong. So there, I'll throw that in there as a challenge.
My name is Kirsten Boileau. I'm with SAP. I'm based in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, about an hour and a half west of Toronto. And for the last 6 years, I've been leading our global digital selling programs. And for the last year and a half, I am now also responsible for upskilling our entire marketing organization on digital marketing. Fun fact about me is that my degree is actually in agriculture in animal science.
Ooh, okay.
Interesting.
Very cool.
We'll have to connect after.
All right, thank you. Good morning and good evening and good afternoon. My name is Robert Chongfield. I'm the COO of Krisp. Krisp is a technology and product company that removes background noise during calls like this. Krisp is deployed in over 100 million devices with partners like Discord, and also deployed in some of the largest call centers around the world. Couple of fun facts. I know you asked for one. I've been to Yerevan many times, and
Nice.
I enjoy spending time in. And as part of that, I'm an amateur winemaker, so I enjoy tasting wine with Varag as well.
That's awesome.
Beautiful.
Hey. So, hi, I'm Bob Apollo from Inflexion-Point, and I work with B2B focused tech companies on scaling up their business. Prior to that, I worked for startups, scale-ups, and corporates. And what I've learned is I prefer working for smaller organizations, but I enjoy the challenge of selling into bigger organizations, which maybe is part of the theme of today's event. Fun fact
I heard.
about me, unlike all the other 5 members of the team, I'm a terrible barefoot water skier.
Okay,
Hi, I am Eduard Mkrtchyan. I'm head of administration department at MTS Armenia. I work for PricewaterhouseCoopers, American Bar Association, USAID, US Embassy, and for the last 11 years I'm with Viva-MTS. And happy to join you. Thank you. And fun facts, I have black belts down from World Karate Association. That's
Very cool.
good. Thank you for that. Thanks for the introductions. And I'd like to start the first question with Bob Apollo, if possible. When I was researching you, I saw one very specific line that you had, which was outcome-centric selling. And keeping that in the framework of the conversation, what do you think in sales, in general, what are the key exciting things for you? Is it helping others? Is it solving a problem? Is it making money? What is the thing that drives you the most when you engage in a sales cycle?
Well, that's a really good question, because I suspect people are motivated by a bunch of different things. The reason we talk about outcome-centric selling in my business is because I think selling's gone through 3 ages. There was a first age where you were selling products. There was a second age where you were selling so-called solutions, a response to customer needs. And I think in any business that's working in what I'll call the as-a-service economy now, the third age of selling is really about making sure the customer gets the outcomes they were looking for when they came to you in the first place. And frankly, none of us will make money in the long term unless we're very focused on making sure that our customers are successful users of the things that we're offering them.
Right. Is there anyone that'd like to expand on that further? You're on mute, Robert.
Thank you, Bob. I think you're spot on there. I think identifying how the customers define success for themselves, and not only selling into that, but understanding what that means from a product standpoint, so that the sales team is really more about collaboration and fixing a problem or solving a problem or developing an ROI for customers, as opposed to really trying to force fit something. So I really love the approach, and I think that we are globally in that third stage of the sales cycle that you define there, which is our service and outcomes for customers.
Great. Right. And tapping into that, there is a certain level of B2B sales etiquette that comes with that. Bob, maybe you can continue, or anybody else. What are some of those things that really stand out and you really try to look for during that sales process?
Well, let me kick it off, and I'm sure the others have got things to contribute to this. I think traditionally people have talked about having a universal value proposition, something that the company, if you like, offered to the marketplace. I think in line with this outcome-centric approach, what's really important now is the customer's value story, and that with them, collaboratively, you help them to answer 3 questions. Why change? Why choose us? And why act now? And I think if any of those questions can't be satisfactorily answered, customers will hold back from making a commitment.
Right. Right. Varag, did you have something to add?
No, I just think that's totally fair. I completely agree. In terms of etiquette in the process of selling, I've found what's been really helpful has just been, everyone uses this word actively listening, but that for me has been a game changer in terms of having customers, really empathize or being able to empathize with customers and really trying to drive a deal forward is instead of speaking so much about the product or anything else, it's just asking some really smart questions and listening as much as possible. And I've learned that the company or the salesperson who understands the customer the most or makes the customer feel that they've been understood the most, typically it wins the deal. And that for me has been a huge learning over the last year for myself.
Right, that's absolutely true. Yeah, go ahead, Kirsten. Sorry.
I think really focusing on building that relationship with the customer, whether it's once you've already got the meeting or even before, you can do it through social and digital platforms, building that relationship, letting them know that they're heard, as Varag mentioned, but also that you get them from a human standpoint, because B2B, B2C, those things to my mind are going away, and we're really need to be selling human to human. Somebody else coined that term, that's not mine. But we have to focus on relationships. Relationships to me are one of the most important aspects of sales.
Right, I totally agree. I think that in these days, with the rise of social media and the technologies that we have at our disposal, many young companies assume that if you just put some money into basic digital promotion, that's enough. But clearly it is not. It's building those relationships is extremely important. And which brings us over to the sales cycle. In my industry, in the biotech industry, we have sales cycles that can be just a couple of days, and the longest one in our company has been 5 years, a 5-year sales cycle. So, and this can be just a small lab that is purchasing, or it can be an institution-wide installation of our software. So seeing that range is very interesting for me. So I'm curious if, Liana, if you could share the screen on the sales cycle. And if you guys can take a look at that, our audience can take a look at this. And if we can have Varag to start as the business operation guru of Clay Air, would you mind just starting us off with this as to what you've seen in your industry and just in your experience?
Sure, yeah. So from a sales cycle perspective, just to give a little bit of context, we're oftentimes selling our software to device makers. And so device makers they're building their own product with a whole set of different kinds of hardware and other kinds of software stacks that all need to come together. So that could be on its own a 12-month process. So anywhere from 6 to 12 months is what I've seen from a sales cycle standpoint. But in terms of what we have here, I mean, I could just talk through what it looks like. Definitely, looking for prospecting for leads, times looks for companies that are in the device space we care about. So in our world, it's mostly augmented and virtual reality. Not too many new ones, so we kind of know most of the players. But prospecting, can look anything like going to, in the past, pre-COVID, going to events, right, and initiating contact by getting lists of who's attending, reaching out to them. It could be through partnerships as well. I find that as a great way of looking for new leads. So there's companies that want to partner with us who have their own tech stack, and we're going after the same customer. And if we build relationships like that, then oftentimes that creates for warmer leads rather than just cold ones. So I always try to tell younger companies that that's a great way to get awesome leads, and initiating contact that way is through a referral. There's no better way to initiate contact with someone by someone mutual between you and the lead that the lead definitely trusts and looks upon highly. So and then in terms of qualifying the lead, we ask some smart questions to understand what their business is, how much product they might be moving, what they're estimating. I work a lot also not just with big companies but startups as well, and in that case we try to understand how much funding they've got. You're looking for signals, right? You're looking for signals of the company's ability to move product for you if you have some minimums you're looking for, and then as well as to see whether this company could actually use or benefit from the product that you're offering, right? So asking some smart questions there helps. And I can go through all these and what these look like for us, Zareh, but I don't want to take up the whole time. So you let me know.
No,
Yeah.
no need for
Yeah.
that. Just curious if you have like a very strict like stages that you guys refer to in your company. What can a startup do to develop their own infrastructure? Is okay, we qualified this form of a lead,
Right.
warm lead, a cold lead versus an opportunity versus, you know, each company does their own thing. So I guess what kind of an
Yeah.
advice would you give to our audience as they're starting out as to how to approach this process?
Yeah, it's good. I think it starts first with business goals, right? So you really want to understand, like, all right, this year, what are we targeting in terms of revenue, right? And what type of customers targets make the most sense? In this case, we're talking about enterprise, you know, trying to understand how many customers you might need in that given year. You know, that will help you sort of know whether you've got the bandwidth to deal with what bandwidth of customers you can deal with in a given year, right? Given the size of your company and its resources. So, you know, starting from there, you know, what we'll do is we'll have that first initial call of discovery, and we'll really try to understand whether there's a fit with that customer or not. If there is, right, if they meet that standard of like average deal size, let's say, and they actually have a real need for the product, then we'll obviously move them along to like the next stage of them being a prospect of some sort, right? And if not, then, you know, I'm not the type that just like doesn't ever speak to them again. We'll definitely, you know, kind of put it into the CRM as like a cadence to reach out maybe once every quarter, that type of thing, right? And we'll move with the ones that are ready to move forward, right, to proposals and so on and so forth. So
so to come out of that very quickly and go to Eduard. So now you're on the receiving end of people following up with you, hoping to work with you. You know, at what point do you get annoyed with the follow-ups, right? So let's say you are now a qualified lead, you've shown some interest. At what point do you say, you know what, I like this guy following up? And what point do you say, okay, enough is enough, we're not interested at this moment?
Well, thank you. No, actually, we never say, no, we're not interested in the product or anything. Our key purpose is to ensure that we have the best offers, and we support all the partners to provide their best technical and commercial proposals to us, because through this we can find the best quality and price product to meet our targets. So what we do, actually, we work closely with our vendors and with our companies that applying to us, and helping them to improve their offers if we see any mistakes, etc. But before going to that, I would like to say a couple of things about Viva-MTS. So our partners know who they're dealing with and what are some requirements that we're looking for. It just, as you may know, shares of Viva-MTS are sold in New York Stock Exchange, which brings us into a very strict compliance rules and regulations. Anti-corruption following FCPA, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and we also fall under the UK Bribery Act. So that's the things that our partner companies need to consider when we send them requests for proposals, to study very carefully and answer all the questions included in that questionnaire.
Noted. Is there anyone else that'd like to add to this slide before we go to the next topic?
Can I very quickly jump in? Because I think one of the challenges with a lot of conventional sales processes, they almost make the assumption the customer's going to buy something, and the only question is from who. And actually, I suspect for many startups, actually for many companies of all sizes, the customer's in a discretionary purchase. They might choose to do nothing. And so I actually go down a completely different track with the companies I work with, and we try and establish where the customer is in their buying decision process rather than our sales pipeline stages. And we use that to monitor progress and the probability of winning the business. You know, how far are they through their decision-making process?
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's interesting because each business model is a little bit different. We talked earlier about a design-in business, and a design-in, when you're designing into somebody else's product or application, takes much longer for the sales process and the evaluation, and then the eventual go-to-market. Where a lot of smaller early stage companies are trying to figure out their time to market, their time to revenue, time to cash, all these things. We're pretty fortunate at Krisp that we have solutions that can be adopted within enterprise rather quickly. So I think understanding whether we're fixing a pain point or aligning with a strategic initiative during the discovery process is critical, because if you're not, you're kind of going against the wind and trying to convince. Yep. And then the key for a solution that's software-based that can be evaluated easily is to provide for an easy trial process. So it's easy, almost self-serve, doesn't cost anything, the resources are light, and therefore customers can start using the solution and see if it does fit, create an ROI or fix a problem. And if that is happening during the sales process, the close rate is much higher, the close window is much shorter. And then the conversion to onboarding is basically already done because they've done it during the trial. So it's a way for, again, all businesses are different, but if as an application business or as a services business, the ability to condense the sales cycle by doing more upfront, but ensuring it doesn't create a burden on an early stage company, creating those self-service tools is really important. And I think those all link together to be able to drive conversions.
Right, and on the purchasing side, we noticed a lot of RFPs going out, requests for purchases, that has that what Eduard was just talking about, kind of the hard requirements that you have to kind of abide by before even being considered to go into these meetings. Is there anything that any of you would like to comment on with regards to that, your experience, the difficulties with that? How to make that process more efficient?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. RFPs, in my world, it could be different in different industries, but if I receive an RFP, I'm already way too, without knowing the customer that well, I'm way too late to the game. Yeah. You gotta be writing the RFP with them if you think you're gonna win the deal. I mean, it could be different somewhere in other industries, I'm not sure, but in my industry, it's you gotta be there to help guide, what it is the requirements should be, and that typically that's a good sign if you're doing it with them. Hopefully they're not doing that. The customer's not doing that with competitors at the same time. So.
I think that's a pretty universal experience. I mean, maybe in government organizations,
right, yeah.
It might be slightly different, but in commercial organizations, you've got to be ahead of the game, haven't you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's difficult for early stage companies, where to decide to invest. These are trade-off resources. And if an RFP comes out that is a big stretch that requires the entire company to go organize on that may not be a good thing to do. Or example, having automotive as your lead industry, it just may take too long to get there. So understanding that on the front end is really critical as you start to receive RFPs as an early stage company.
Really true.
Right. Yeah, just to comment on that from the biotech side. So we've seen both, Varag. We've seen cases where they send us an RFP, and it's because they've already made their decision. They're just sending that over for them to say, hey, we did our due diligence, we're not interested. And we've had cases where, for example, especially with COVID-19, we have a lot of these labs that are starting to churn out samples, thousands of them a day, and they have to very quickly put out an RFP on their hard requirements, and they get their contacts out, they get their people out, they send it out, then it becomes a very fair kind of battle for position. And we've also had instances where we basically wrote the RFP for them. So it's very interesting to see the differences in the industry and how different people, approach this. So this brings us over to another question, and this one will be directed to Eduard. So specifically, oh, by the way, Eliana, can you share the screen once again? Because I'd like to have this for the audience so they can see what we're talking about. So this is with regards to difference between B2B and B2C. So if you could go on to the next slide. There we go. So, you know, there are some differences, there are some similarities. I specifically want to talk about the portion of how it is B2B is very logic driven, that evaluation period. We talked about RFPs. You talked about those anti-corruption requirements and all of these things. So with that process, what do you guys do to make that process more effective? And what can, on the pitch side, what can they do to become more effective in this process and basically make your life easier in your decision-making process?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a very good one. And taking in the chance, I would like to just mention a couple of things that we follow. It's equal opportunity, fair treatment. So what we do to cut it short so that the process can be very quick. We have the Oracle-based iSourcing system. It's on the web. So any company who is willing to cooperate with us just enters that on our website. The procurement field registers with iSourcing. It enters all the information needed, and then it receives all the RFPs that we have. So at the first stage, they receive the technical, we need to receive the technical proposals. And if they qualify with all technical part, they move to the commercial part, which is bidding part. It's all electronic, it's all automated, so it doesn't take too much time, and it can take a couple of hours to select a vendor. I mean, for those that pass the technical solution. So of course, it depends on the amount of the purchase. And because of that, it may take different stages of approvals and reviews, etc., expertise involved. If it's a complex product of technical nature, it involves multiple groups from Viva-MTS and even from HQ to consider if this is something that can have very effect on a network, let's say, or on our billing system or something else. So it makes a bit more time. But for simple products or some products that's easy to evaluate through that system that we have, gives a chance to all our client corporations, companies, to see immediately the best offer, and they can bid as much as they can. So decision is taken right after that. And again, it's all electronic.
And what kind of red flags have you noticed in your previous experiences that founders make that you can pinpoint?
Yeah, actually, there are a couple of things. I mentioned this on FCPA and all these things on purpose because we receive sometimes proposals with the questionnaires not filled out, which makes the work a bit difficult. So we ask them to fill out all the forms, resubmit, etc. So this is the first thing that they need to take very close attention. The second part is a technical part. And I think before sending proposals, I think they need to very thoroughly study the technical requirements and provide what they actually ask to provide and say if they're compliant or not, and very clearly highlight their comparative and competitive advantages in their proposal. So it will help us to evaluate. It's those RFPs which have heavy technical components, we put a strong pressure on quality part. So we need to make sure, and the companies that provide proposals need to make stress what kind of product they provide, the quality or the services, and again, show their advantages. And those that are shortlisted for the quality part, then only let for the commercial, and this is where the price war goes on. That's in brief, not to go in too much.
Oh, that's very helpful. Anybody else would like to comment on this?
Can I make 3 quick observations? Firstly,
Make 4.
no. One, I think it's believed that B2B buying is largely logical. I wouldn't underestimate there's an emotional dimension in that decision making as well. Secondly, it's really useful to understand, just thinking about what we've heard, whether our buyer is an experienced or an inexperienced buyer, because that will affect the way we might respond and help. And thirdly, it's really important we understand whether this is a inevitable purchase where they're going to buy something, it's just a question of from who, or whether it's a discretionary purchase. You know, they might buy something, but it's entirely possible they'll do nothing. I think those dynamics play a really big part in a lot of B2B buying.
Absolutely. And Varag, to not put you on the spot, we were talking about red flags. Is there anything, any mistakes that you've made in the very beginning of starting out the company that you care to share with the audience?
Oh, there's lots. There's lots of mistakes I think I made. I think the first one is, and I see this being the most common, at least especially for founders. Although I wasn't a founder of Clay, I think I did the same mistake, which is just generally just speaking way too much about the product, right, or about the company. I see that founders like love to dive into demos, and they kind of they like to lean on the product as sort of a crutch. Right. And as in that conversation with the customer, I was a victim of that too. Right. So I definitely did the same thing. I think another important one is probably, not understanding the customer's like personal motivations. Right. So you're sort of understanding the business, but you're not understanding what this means to them and their job. Right. And that's still one that sometimes I commit today. And then I'd probably say another one is, and this is much more tactical that I've made the mistake of, and don't make as much anymore, is if you're driving an enterprise deal, you definitely want to always make sure you set up the next meeting before you get off the phone or that face-to-face meeting. That's like a very small, tiny one that I think actually has a bigger impact than people really know until they've been through it. So those are a few, but there is more.
So this is an excellent segue into the next topic, and let me build up to it and pull Kirsten in to answer some questions. I think being action driven and kind of playing the follow-up game is extremely important. I see a lot of people that assume that their product is so awesome that now everyone is going to run after them to buy it. But the real thing to talk about here is that these companies, these buyers have millions of other things that they're doing, and it is your job to constantly follow up and be action driven and close the sale at every step of the way. And the sale is a metaphorical sale. So whether it's the email, whether it's the phone call, whether it's the web call, it always needs to end on a note of what's next. And what helps us to do that is a lot of different kinds of CRM platforms that are out there. So thank you, Liana. So this slide just very quickly shows you some of the top ones in the industry: Zoho, Salesforce, HubSpot, and of course STEP that I've been researching, and I was blown away at the different kind of tools that they have over there. So this is an advice to the audience that are starting out to really invest in a potential CRM system to help them with that process, to be able to follow up. When you have 5,000 leads, how do you keep up with that? And you really need some kind of a robot to help you with that, because the human brain simply cannot keep up. So this brings me over to a question to Kristen with regards to your experience, somewhat related to CRM, with regards to social listening. If you could share kind of what that concept is in general, and also the importance of consultative sales during that process of utilizing CRM.
Oh, for sure. Thank you for that question. I've spent the last 7 years really, implementing social selling and digital selling for myself as a marketing intern rep type thing, and then business development, and then really focusing on the enablement of those behaviors and tools into SAP. And so this question really brings home a lot of the things that I've been working on, especially around social listening. I think it's one of the most important pieces of a digital selling program, or the digital selling process, you might say. For a sales rep is, the first step is really to have a good digital brand, making sure that they're, whatever platform, social platform they might be most present on, wherever their customers are, they need to make sure that that brand is, or that, profile is very much customer centric. It speaks to the ways that they are supporting their customers, how they're making their customers successful. And then the next step is to start to listen to what's happening out there in the industry, understanding from an industry perspective what's going on, understanding from an individual customer perspective what the kinds of challenges they're leveraging. And then as you get into the sales cycle and you perhaps they're now a lead and an opportunity, understand, still not just relying on the previous conversations that you had with them, whether it's via email or phone or WebEx or however you might be communicating, but also making sure that you're following up on their social profiles and seeing what kinds of things they're talking about. Maybe they're in online communities, digital communities out there, as well as the traditional social platforms, and looking at those things and making sure that you understand perhaps how other people are influencing what they're thinking about, what are the questions they might be coming up with, what kinds of questions are they asking their peers, because as companies, we don't necessarily have that full ear, as you mentioned, of the customer. Their peers on the social platforms actually have much more influence on what they look at, how they make their decisions, the factors that go into their decision making than we do. And so understanding by listening and reviewing what is being said to them, what kinds of questions they're asking, what kinds of posts they're posting. Are they posting articles that might have a completely different viewpoint than the one you presented? To know, you have a much better understanding of their psyche, of what's going through their head by just doing that due diligence and understanding them as throughout the entire cycle. You really need to make sure that you're doing that social listening. It will help you to build a relationship. It will help you to better understand and be able to better approach your customer at each phase of that sales cycle.
That's very helpful, and I see a question. I do see the questions in the comments. We will definitely go through them, but one of them just really stood out because I think it's so related to what you're saying, and maybe you can expand on that a little bit. The question is, how do you handle aggressive buyers and aggressive competitor sellers? And Kirsten, you're talking about social listening and really just doing your due diligence in understanding the needs, the pain points. So I don't know if you want to continue expanding on that with regards to aggressive buyers, and if anybody, and this is up for grabs, anybody can answer as well.
Yeah, I can probably start the conversation off, but I don't have as much experience with this. I don't have I haven't done as much in the sales side. I'm more in the marketing and enablement side than on the sales side. Aggressive buyers, I don't think I've ever seen aggressive buyers. I wish there was more aggressive buyers, I think. But aggressive competitor sellers, yes, absolutely. I think, and a lot of the questions that come to me around digital selling and aggressive competitors is that, hey, this person is saying bad things about SAP on social. How do I handle that? And the way that we've always approached it is, don't engage, don't, that can spiral out of control very, very quickly. But also, if you really feel you need to respond, take it offline, and don't do that in front of a big online community. Anybody else have any thoughts there?
I salute everything you just said. There's no value in getting into the social media conversation with a competitor. that spirals very, very fast. It's interesting on the aggressive buyer side. The more commoditized the solution, the more aggressive the buyers are going to be, and I think the more aggressive your competitors. So for early stage companies, being really, really clear about the competitive environment, I think will help you manage your buyers. So if you have a unique solution, they may have market power and allows them to behave aggressively. That doesn't mean you need to respond and react to that. It's really about being comfortable about what you have, and to what was being discussed by Kirsten and Varag before, don't just lean on your product, lean on your knowledge of their business, lean on an understanding of their market, what their strategic initiatives are, and you can diffuse that sort of aggressiveness by not so much developing a relationship for relationship's sake, but developing a relationship to understand their business and provide them a solution they can't get elsewhere. That's a big cost differentiation.
Yeah.
Please.
I'm sorry, that's back to what we heard about active listening, isn't it, before? That's such an important element of this.
Yeah, I find that active listening always, like, it pretty much is probably the best way to diffuse aggressiveness or any kind of, emotion, negative emotions especially. I also think if we're talking about enterprise sales, or selling to corporates, typically we're talking about longer sales cycles, and we are talking about building relationships. And if that's the world you're in, you want to kind of pick and choose who you're working with. And if someone's kind of, when I hear the word aggressive, I thought like even, on a character level or something like that. And I would say that if you're on the phone with someone and you don't like their character, and this is an enterprise sale, just go to the next person. Life's too short, kind of thing. Just find the people you want to work with. There's enough of them out there, and then in terms of the aggressive competitor, look, at the end of the day, I think it's important not to focus too much on competitors. So I think people who are more Amazon approach, like if you're obsessed with your customer, and you understand their problems and needs, and you always think about how, your product or your business model or even the character of your company aligns with that, and you're keeping an eye on how those are trending, then you're gonna do fine. There's enough out there, right? The competitor, maybe every now and then you just try to understand what they're doing, let's say once every quarter at the most, maybe every half a year. And that helps you in conversations. Honestly, for me, just to be able to say, hey, if you're trying to do this instead, oh, that's what you're trying to do. Okay, well then just go to them. They'll do maybe a better job. It's a better fit, especially if you're in a growing market, right? So. Yeah.
That's very interesting that you mentioned that. So in our company, we have a policy. We create battle cards on all of our competition, and we update them every quarter. And our job is to just know what the competition is doing, because the lab digitization concept is relatively a new concept. So everybody is fighting for market share. Everybody's fighting for position. And now is going through that process of which are the top 3 products out there that dominate the market. So because we're in that competitive stage at the moment, we do pay a lot of attention to our competition. We notice that somebody is leaning more towards molecular biology, while somebody else is leaning more towards chemistry. Then okay, here's a gap for us to go into this direction. So and the development is so fast and so quick that if you close your eyes, you open your eyes, all of a sudden your competition has developed so many new features, and you haven't been able to either keep up or you have. So it's quite interesting for us in that way. I see Bob nodding. Is there anything you want to add?
I mean, I think what happens in a lot of technology markets is it kind of turns into an arms race. Feature function. Over, one company looks to be ahead, then somebody else duplicates the feature list. I think one of the ways of trying to stand back a bit from that is to explain how and why your approach is different. Not just the detailed functionality, but how you've thought about solving the customer's problem. Because I think if you can differentiate yourself on approach and not just on, we've got a better feature list right now, you have a lasting differentiation that way. And it kind of felt like you were sounded like you were heading that way a bit in the biotech industry, you know, that you've got a different approach maybe to solving the customer's problem.
Right. Very good point.
Yeah, if I may, I have one comment I would like to make. I fully agree with what said. I would also add that I think the companies need to assess the needs of the corporate customers and in more details, understanding what we really want to achieve. And the other thing that I want to mention for the companies to consider their own resources, their own strengths and weaknesses, and are they able to deliver that? Because once they enter into cooperation with big companies or corporations like us, they need to ensure that all these resources are in place. Bidding is one place, making commitments is one thing, but delivering the quality we expect is a bit different thing. And this may put a very bad impression on the companies and have a history of bad performance, poor performance, which goes on the list. So I've seen a couple of cases when companies eager to cooperate and they start bidding, they reducing price, they promising everything, and when the time comes for implementation, they see that, well, they don't have that qualified staff, let's say, or they don't have that resources, or they are just didn't understand the full scope. And that's what I was telling, that very important to go very deep into details of the technical requirements to understand really what our needs, and then see if they can deliver that. That's thank you.
Right, and to just add on to that very quickly with a comment that you also see people just keep on adding new features, and the system becomes heavy and it becomes something completely different. Because if you're tech driven, you're excited about your thing, you're like, oh, maybe we can add this and maybe we can add that, we can also do this, and you all of a sudden you change your product along the way. All of the relationships that you've built, the pitches that you've done in that process for the specific position in the market changes, and you continuously evolve into something that you might have not even planned to be, and that can definitely cause some issues. This actually brings me over to Robert. This is a question for you. So now, you know, let's say you have that tech person in the company that just wants to keep on adding new features to the product. You have somebody from the legal team, you have the visionary, you have the business development side. You know, you build your team and you have your meetings and you decide which direction you want your company to go into. So you have a lot of experience in this. So I was just hoping that you could talk about what are the pain points that you come across with your team when it comes to deciding the vision of the company and how to pitch that vision to potential buyers.
Yeah, it's a great question, and particularly for earlier stage companies who are building brand and building position in the market. I think there's certainly internal work to be done around aligning on what we do and what we don't do, and having a core set of principles around that, so that when we engage with the market and requests come in, either for product changes, product updates, new products, we have something to bounce it off of. So. And that's at a high level, but it's an important thing to do. As it relates to engagement with the market and specific customers, and then therefore product management, I think there are two important questions as earlier stage companies engage with bigger opportunities. And to Eduard's point, you have to be able to validate your claims, right? You're going to claim this in your sales process. Big companies are going to validate it. If it's not validated, you're going to miss it. So as these requests come in, two important questions. Is it a blocker for that deal? And does their request scale to other customers? And if both of those are true, I think what organizationally, you'll want to organize around that and get that to market pretty quickly. Your customers will see that and they'll start to see their requirements as part of your product coming out. If either one of those aren't true, I think you'll end up as a smaller stage company, burning a lot of cycles and not getting either the design wins or the revenue generating wins on the back end of that. I think you'll end up having a lot of feature and functionality that won't be adopted or won't be valued and therefore paid for in your pricing.
Mm-hmm.
Noted. Anyone else would like to add to that? Okay, so Liana, if you could share the next slide. Of course, the decision-making unit, kind of the academic approach to this. When you're pitching, you come across these kind of people on the purchasing side. Ed, which one are you? Just kidding. So, when looking at this, so I'd like to open this question to anyone really. What are the red flags that you guys see that you come across within the decision-making unit on the buyer side, and then maybe somebody can comment from the other side, the one that's pitching to the DMU. Who are the people that you are looking for? So whoever wants to start.
I'll jump in with one thing that you typically see. What I've seen in past deals that I've worked on is, a lot of these different individuals, they're not really speaking to each other as well as you think, right? Yep. So as when you're on the other side of it, you think, oh, well, they're all in the same company, so they must all know each other, and truth is that in today's world, I feel like even if they're on the same team, they may not even be in the same office. One might be new, they don't know each other. And I've been in situations where I've known the company and the people better than they've known each other, right? Mm-hmm. And that can actually happen. You're like the bridge between them mm-hmm. for a particular deal. And sometimes your project might need to cut across different groups. Sometimes it's within one group. So you'll get, varying degrees of this. And I think a smart thing to do up front is, really try to make sure that you include, or you try to discover like who really needs to be involved. So I've asked that question as early as like the second call, sometimes on the first, point of contact with the prospect is like, okay, if it's going well, we feel like there's a fit here, discoveries happen. Trying to get a sense of just asking like, hey, who else needs to be part of the process if this was to move forward? Can pull them in as soon as possible. Sometimes there's some resistance to that from the, corporate side, because they don't want to have other people's time, before they know it's something real. But as soon as you could possibly get it, to get the person who's got veto power, the economic buyer, every one of these characters in the email thread at a minimum or on your call, the more likely that you won't get like a showstopper or some weird thing happening down the line, right? Where after 3 months of working on this project, someone internally kills it because they don't know who you are and they don't even know the person you've been talking to so much. So
and you
that's
start
critical.
The process all over again.
Oh yeah, or that person leaves. That happens a lot too. It's like that guy you've been working for 4 months, they get a new job, they're out of there, right? So very common.
It's so dangerous to be single-threaded, isn't it, around a single individual? By the way, if any of the listeners are interested in a bit of reading, there was a fascinating book a few years back called The Challenger Customer, which looked at the different sort of personas within a decision-making group. And one of their recommendations was to try and find somebody who's capable of mobilizing their colleagues. Partly because of what we've heard about, they often don't know each other very well, don't work together very well. I think we need to judge whether there's somebody or some group who can align everybody else around not just choosing us, but actually making the project work in the first place. Because, being selected and the project not being approved isn't really a particularly good outcome, is it?
And
sure.
I'm so happy you mentioned that. And I'm kind of looking at the champion person here. That person who feels passionate about the product, the person who feels passionate about the project. Would you think that is the right person to at least to potentially start with? As that will be able to influence everybody else in the organization, and I know this is not necessarily like a black and white answer, but do you see any kind of a pattern that the right person to start with or not? Because the influencer one or the influencer 2 can be just a person who's just doing their job. They're looking at the requirements. Okay, cool. They pass it on. How do you get that team, that decision-making unit, to feel passionate about the product and the project, to really push it through that sales cycle that can be 30 days or it can be a year?
Right. I mean, I think one of the things you look for is somebody who isn't actually over passionate about you or the project, somebody who pushes back, who asks tough questions, because that's actually a sign they're treating the thing seriously. And they're thinking about, how do we sell it internally? And I think if you don't get tough questions back, if it's all adoration, not such a positive indicator as you might think.
Yeah.
To get them to help you tell the story to the rest of the organization, right? Whatever that story might be, whether it's a really good ROI, saving on resources, whatever that story might be, you need to make that into their context and get them to share that story internally so that they can build those passionate people within the organization, because you've told a story. People connect to stories. They really, if they can feel some sort of connection, emotional connection to that, they will be much better influencers, champions, even the bean counters are the other side if you can tell a good story.
I mean, storytelling is so important. I think the other thing I'd try and judge is, does this person know how decisions really get made in this organization? And have they been part of previous successful change projects?
Yeah. And you can just straight up ask them if they've done that before, what it's looked like. I've done that. And I agree with you, Bob, on like, if someone is skeptical up front, if you win them over, they could be typically your best champion, because you've kind of brought them over to this side. A big mistake I see, or common situation, I think is a mistake that founders will make, is you'll be talking to one person at the company, they'll say, "Oh, just send me your deck, and then I'll pass it around," and that's like 99.9% of the time doesn't go anywhere. Reason why is because you don't even know yet if that's the person who is a champion or can bring everyone together. And so if you don't know that yet, it's still on you to do that, right? So don't just blindly pass decks. You don't know who they're passing it to. You don't know what that person's mindset is, what their challenges are. So you got to manage that. So I'm not a big fan of those decks. Another thing I wanted to also bring up here is, I think in that chart you were showing, that typically is the case, and it gets more and more complex as you're dealing with a BU, right? Like an actual business unit within a huge corporation. There's a lot of touch points now with startups that are just like, an innovation group. And maybe you don't have to go through as much of like all those different kinds of people. That being said, I also wanted to just raise the flag that like a lot of these innovation groups, quote unquote, they're just talking to you to gather information. They're not really looking to do projects oftentimes. Sometimes they are, but just because you do a project with an innovation group, that's not a BU. That's not a real sort of corporate deal in a way, right? And sometimes, they pretend as if they have the power to do that, but they'll just flip you over the fence to a BU. And then if you're lucky enough, but those are much different needs and much more serious decisions and a lot more complex from my experience. So there's a little bit of a wall there I found in most corporates, but maybe it's, it's different from one to the other.
Well, there is. I recognize we're getting towards the end, but just to carry on a little bit, there are plenty of enterprises that are organizationally set up to work with startups in early stage. That doesn't mean they're set up to buy from early stage.
Right.
So the innovation group, there's a lot of learning you can do, but it doesn't necessarily translate. So just be a little bit careful as you enter into certain groups that have startup support mechanisms. It may not translate to business.
Yeah.
Do you guys have time for a close-up question? Can we continue on to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Liana, if you could share the next slide. I really wanted to go over this one. This is the customer decision journey. So we've built up until this point. We've talked about the B2B versus B2C. We talked about the sales cycle. We talked about the whole evaluation period. Now the question is, once we have and these are the I guess the turns of Dilijan. If you've been there, you know how crazy those turns can be. And if that's the journey that you're going into, how does this process look to you in your industry? So I'd like to open this up to anybody that like to answer this, but then I'd like to really bring it back to Ed and talk about how, you know, in industries, and then this journey varies from country to country, industry to industry. And since Armenia Startup Academy is hosting us for this, and since Viva-MTS is very much part of this, I would really like to know what are the circumstances in Armenia specifically. How can people approach you? How can they work with you to make this journey as smooth as possible, and be able to gain your trust, you know, the purchasing side's trust, in order to be in that loyalty loop. So to our audience, please take a look at this. Look at the this particular diagram. This is different from the traditional funnel diagram. This is kind of the new accepted decision journey kind of thing. But again, this doesn't mean that all sales processes are like this. But I really wanted to just put this out there, open it up for everyone, and then close it off with Eduard to discuss the circumstances in Armenia with regards to this.
Real quick, I think it's a huge mistake to think these things are linear or circular. They're normally a lot messier than that. In fact, you might have on the right-hand side put a bowl of spaghetti rather than a winding road. There's a famous bit of research by Gartner which tried to map out the real buying journey. And what it mapped out were twists and turns and loopbacks and abandonment and going round in circles. And I think part of our role, if we can, is to help the customer make a more orderly, more effective buying journey, and not keep getting, you know, distracted in all these potential ways. Avoid the spaghetti.
And for us on the sales side, how do we push visibility and then certainty earlier in the process, whether it's a positive outcome or a closed won, closed lost? The earlier we can do, the more cycles we have to do more. That's not commitment, but we end up spending too much time on deals that don't come to fruition with the early stage companies, and it's a huge risk.
Yeah. And I one thing recently that's helped is actually being more explicit about what the processes look like with other companies, and then sharing that with a lead, and just being like, hey, look, this is what's worked well. We go through just an initial discovery, and then we'll go through, like, you know, a technical test in our case, right? And I'll tell them like what works, and then they can kind of have a better sense of like where they're going, or else sometimes it just, you don't know where the end is. And I think as the early stage company, you know, selling in, you've got to define those points. So oftentimes I'll come in and be like, guys, we've been technical testing for like 4 weeks here. Let's put an end date to it so we know we can move on to the next step, or else like where's the end, right? And I think sometimes it's you're allowed to put your foot down as an early stage company sometimes, and like be like, I just want to know what the end state is before we go to the next phase, right? And I think that's the fair.
It's reasonable.
Actually working backwards from that end state, a sort of mutual success plan that says, well, if your ultimate goal is to land here are the things we both need to navigate through in order to get there.
Absolutely.
The approach of this is what we see with other customers also gives the customer a little bit more comfort. You still have to go through diligence, you still have to go through your evaluations, but customers don't like being the first or the only ones doing something. So even that process sort of just builds a little bit of depth of credibility, assuming it's true, but it does, knowing that they're not the first. Yeah.
Right.
Very true.
So I guess, Eduard, if you could close us off, and then if you guys stick around, there are some questions in the panel, but if not, that's okay as well. But Eduard, if you could expand on this from your side. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Zareh, with pleasure. Just a couple of words about the purchasing process in Viva-MTS. It's based on international best practices and standards. So it used model of US, UK, and European countries. They're like Vodafone, we use their model, and MTS Russia. So what does this mean? Actually, all our purchasing process are posted on our websites, and any company can enter and see what our current purchasing process do we have. It's you enter to mts.am and go about us and the company, and then you will see the procurement part. And what I would recommend the companies to do is to register in our iSourcing platform, Oracle-based, which has a notification key in there. So any purchasing process that may refer to this or the other company, they will receive automatic notification that Viva-MTS has this purchasing process, please apply, and these are the documentations. So we have two types of purchasing process. Let's say it's solicited and unsolicited proposals. Whatever you see on our website, those are open purchasing process solicited proposals that reflect our needs, what we need to buy. So all the companies need to assess very carefully what we want to buy. These has its own routine assessment, evaluations, technical evaluations, and then the bidding process, and then winner selection, and then the contract, etc., engagement. But also we let other companies, there might be some innovative ideas or something that startups may have on their mind, and that's called unsolicited proposals. So they can send this directly to the procurement. It's procurement at mts.am. So they can say, we have this wonderful product and we want to engage with you in a business. So what we do next, we send this to functional blocks to evaluate how effective or how useful it can be for Viva-MTS and how it will support to achieve our targets, which send you end user and satisfying end user and getting some revenues. So they have to clearly state what their product gives. So we have an option to use it for trial period without going through complicated purchasing processes to see if this works well as it's mentioned in the proposal. I think if it goes well, then we enter into a long-term partnership with that company. It happens rare. Most cases, we come up with our RFPs, request for proposals. And that's where the companies can find where to engage and how to engage. And what I would also say, if any company is interested to cooperate with Viva-MTS, feel free to send their cover or letters like offers saying that we are this and that company, would like to engage with you. So we put on our registry list as well. So whatever we announce, we send them notifications. So here's the need that we have. If you can provide, that would be great. One thing that I want to mention, in most of our RFPs, we set a long list of mandatory requirements, and they have to be careful on reviewing it, like a project that they have done in the past, the work experience, their engagement, their not only input but outputs, what the results were. So kind of it will be a bit challenging for startups, but still I would highly encourage all of them to engage with the procurement team at Viva-MTS and start with this, if they have this unsolicited proposal that can serve the purpose and ensuring reaching our goals, always welcome.
Great. Thank you for that. And I guess closing the deal, closing the loop here, do you guys all give green light to the audience to reach out to you for potential collaborations and or just asking questions?
Yeah, I do.
Anytime. Yeah.
For sure.
Awesome. So everybody listening in, please feel free to reach out to this amazing panel. I know I will have my follow-ups with each one of you. I think you all bring so much amazing knowledge and experience that I kind of just want to pull information out of to learn myself. So we can consider the panel closed and call it a day. Or if you guys want to stick around, there are still a few more questions in there. Fully up to you guys. I do have my afternoon free, so I can stick around.
I've got 10 more minutes.
Okay.
Sure.
Everybody feels okay with 5 to 10 extra minutes?
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. That's a good
Sure.
sign. Okay. We got a question from Varag, who is asking, could you speak to the challenges of subscription selling for longer-term customer retention? How do you structure these technology service subscriptions, and what analysis do you do for setting prices?
Well, I think we're the unique one here selling subscription applications, so I'll start with it, and I'll say that it's not a direct, simple answer, but there are a couple things to look at. The obvious one is what's going on with competitors. So how are competitors pricing, and with comparable feature function support, and then there's a decision: are you going to compete on price or not? So that's dependent on your product and your service offering. I think as you get into having subscribers and start to look at retention and using price as a mechanism for retention, I think you're going to be at risk if that's what you're leading with. I think retention needs to be driven by new features, new functions, new products, improvement, and world-class support. I think if you do that, we'd probably be able to achieve a price premium versus competitors or alternatives. So it's not a specific formula. You have to engage with the market, you have to understand it, and you have to understand your value proposition. But in general, I'm not a proponent of leading with price unless you're in a highly commoditized market, and most of us that are in early stages are not. So focus on feature functionality, and then have your price support what you're doing in the market.
I think customer experience should also play a big part in that. You should be really focused on your overall customer experience.
Absolutely.
And it isn't just, I'd suggest, about usage, for example, which is one of the common metrics for SaaS. It's about whether the customer perceives they've gotten the benefits from using the technology or the solution. That I think makes you sticky. If they're getting genuine benefit from using it, they're likely to stay with you.
Great. Thanks for these answers. Oh, was there another thing coming?
I could jump in a little bit on the price side. Pricing is very hard for early stage companies, especially if you're working on, something that there isn't too much of a market yet. Like in my world, I've got, we're in a very cutting edge space, so it's not as if there's a ton of data points to draw from. So creative ways we've done that I could share is, looking at what the cost is to the customer for them to build something of similar nature. If they try, what does that effort look like? That's the worst way, because that's going to be like usually the lowest number. Seeing, what solution that they're using right now that you might replace, getting a sense of what that price is. Also, looking to see if like your product is going to add value for them. How much money can you anticipate them making off your product if they include it? So taking a proportion of that is a nice way of looking at it. And I would also just sometimes just look to see like what is their budget. If you're going to do a corporate deal, you should have asked at some point in the cycle what the budget is. And so, just getting a sense of that is important, and like whether or not you're just, how many deals they're trying to, if you're an innovation group, how many of those projects are they trying to do, right? If you're just way off, that's not going to work. And if it's a license deal, just overall trying to understand how much money are they going to make, right? What are they projecting? All those type of things help you set price in the context of it. So.
And another technique that I'd suggest considering, especially if it's a market entry, is maybe taking a little bit of a hit for the first year just to get them in the door, and you go below the market price. You enter the company. They love the product. They keep on using it. But you, of course, have to be very transparent right from the beginning that, hey, this is just for the first year. Then if they have really loved the product and the service has been great, then for year 2, you go into your main pricing routine, and you already have a good customer base. So that's a good technique to consider for market entry. Another question here from Adam. When tying your offering to the client's outcome, how do you avoid getting hit by things out of your control?
And that can happen, can't it? So I think in your sales process, you've really got to make the point and get the customer to understand that you're a key element of helping them achieve that objective. But the customer plays a role as well, and external circumstances plays a role, have a role to play in that as well. But I would say if you don't understand what the customer's ultimate outcome is, you're probably at a disadvantage. So, there are pros and cons of going down an outcome-centric approach. My experience is the pros dramatically overcompensate for the cons.
Great, and looks like we got the last question here from Shahan from the Bay Area. How do you go about creating proactive proposals jointly with clients to increase the likelihood of a close with a customer?
For me, in my experience so far, it's been getting really, this helps when you get involved early, right? Earlier than usual. So you create somewhat of a relationship with the client before they even might want to do the projects a few months later. If you've done a lot of projects around your product before, you should know about it better than your customer should, right? So just having those conversations to be like, you probably want A, B, C, and D. This is what it'll take to get there, So I think offering it, I haven't necessarily said like, hey, I'm going to write the whole RFP for you, right? But here are some, interesting pieces of information you're going to need. How else can I support? And then, I think having them, write the first draft and then, making edits with them along the way. That's a smart way of being pretty proactive about it. But, educating the customer up front, if they've never done a project on your product before, then you're going to be the one informing them, like, what does the success criteria look like? What could a schedule look like? All those type of things. You should know it better than them oftentimes, right? So, yeah.
Just a quick question on that, actually. I don't know, maybe you guys can comment on that. We have people in US, Armenia, mid-Europe. Do you guys see a difference in that process depending on region, culture, background? Do you feel like there is more hand-holding that gets done in, let's say, in the US market compared to the European market?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Big difference. They're very different in the US. I think it's more likely to be doing what Shahan is saying here about proactive proposals in the US. Different cultures have different ways. So, I've worked on, proposals with China before. That's a very different process, right? It's not going to happen the same way. So
business cultures will never treat a vendor as a partner. So it's important to understand that early in the process, and it's hard to overgeneralize or grossly generalize.
Yeah.
Like that. In some instances, you're going to come across big customers who just, no matter what, they beat up vendors. It's what they do. And you'll, as a small company, you'll have to decide whether or not that's the type of environment you want to do business. Others are going to be much more collaborative and open to understanding what your technology can do so that they can set the bar for their RFP and understand what others can do. So you're in a way, the RFP process as an early stage company, in a way, you're also going to be exposing a little bit of what you have to the market. And if you've got something that's better, it'll show up in that process.
Right. Right, absolutely. And I'd like to just send a message to the audience. It's like, while we live in a very politically correct world, it's okay to tap into the different ways of doing business with different cultures. That's just adapting. That's just being human. And it's totally okay. And being in this very cookie cutter way of doing things will only close opportunities for people. And so, yeah, I really wanted to hear your feedback on that as well. So I'm glad that it's all aligned. Any comments before we close this off? It looks like we answered all of the questions. We had a very fruitful call. Of course, Edward just put his comments in there for anyone that's looking to work with Viva-MTS. You have his email in there. Please reach out with a good proposal. But other than that, anything else that you guys would like to mention?
I think we're good.
All right. Well,
Edward, thank you.
thank you, everyone. This was fun. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Take